The news of Russian progress still takes over the political scene of Western countries, led by America, and the Western media, as usual, practices activities of ridicule and suspicion of Russian progress by pumping out contradictory news. And the Western media is directed to the Ukrainian people and Western audience to close the path of questions: what after Soledar, where the Russian army will reach, and where are the billions that resulted in the defeats of the Ukrainians, and what is the benefit of Western suffering in the way of a war that does not concern them? The Western media plays a game of distraction, but the military, political, and intelligence establishments understand, are apprehensive about its dire consequences. There are many reasons to be concerned, because the Russian progress after nearly a year of fighting indicates that it is usually sustainable. In brutal wars, the culture of resistance comes in beginnings and accompanies the beginning of conflicts. All armies usually have this stockpile spent in the beginnings of hit-and-run tactical context. But now the war entered the harvest season. This is the time of the final crop and the strategic stock. There will be no chance of compensation once more. It's war exhaustion syndrome. In other words, war stress. A military term that symbolizes the reaction of armies, especially those limited in terms of capabilities, as it becomes, due to the severity of exhaustion and shocks, results slow, hesitant, and ineffective. The Ukrainian army was not able to absorb massive shocks. That is why we constantly said that pushing Ukrainians to commit suicide is a crime, and this is what the West did, unfortunately. Ukrainians depend on morale and the culture of suicide, but these factors have a limited effect. They cannot stand in front of the huge power. In the end, in wars, there is no margin for emotions. No matter how enthusiastic and impulsive you are, you will be defeated in front of the actual force. This is what is happening now. NATO has spent billions to treat Ukrainian soldiers from the trauma of war psychologists. Consequently, the Russian progress this time is based on scientific and realistic grounds, and the West knows that. Ukraine entering a phase of stress, and since NATO is the exclusive sponsor of the Ukrainian war against Russia, there is no buffer left between Russia and NATO, a physical or even psychological buffer. What does NATO do? NATO, led by America, caused this great rift in Ukraine, therefore they have a heavy responsibility. Are they willing to fill the gap resulting from the Ukrainian shortcomings? Or will he leave the Ukrainians for the conflict? In the two cases NATO will have disastrous results. If NATO intervenes, this is a third world war, and Russia, in any case, spread its nuclear capabilities to deter NATO. Of course, NATO will not dare attack Russia. If NATO stops aiding the Ukrainians militarily, this will likely exacerbate the morale among the Ukrainian soldiers. Those who did not obtain the right to negotiate or surrender, this is the right of armies and peoples. This right is monopolized by Americans. They were not granted membership in the European Union or NATO, only arms, and even selectively. And with great caution, even the Western weaponry is starting to run out. Ukrainian social media start talking about NATO's exploitation of Ukrainians. The accumulation of sacrifices and casualties. It became snowball. This does not mean, by the way, that the Ukrainians love Russia, but they also do not like or do not trust the West, which is a real dilemma that the West and NATO face. Military successes buy time, while military failures are strip positions. NATO is completely stripped naked. The most likely possibility is that the reluctant countries, which oppose escalation, will exert enormous pressure on the Americans and the Ukrainians, claiming either peace or surrender. Why our economy is suffering? There is no sign of the Russians retreating, and as a year has passed since the war, America will not be able to withstand it for a long time. The Europeans will rebel as they sacrificed like the Ukrainians. There are ethical consequences. In this war, America is involved in exposing the Ukrainians to great casualties. Theoretically, America could evade this moral burden and blame Russia. The Russians warned, they will be forced to fight this war. they repeatedly mentioned that military aid is a malicious act that prolonged the war and did not change the war results, but it will exacerbate the suffering of the Ukrainians only. Russia can be accused of committing war crimes, but everyone knows that Russia is waging a clean war. It is not comparable to America's wars. Russia is capable of destroying the capital of Ukraine. Where the NATO is taking the world.